In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can swap out a background to create something like this or this using Photoshop. Okay, so I've got my image opened in Photoshop. I don't really like to do any editing of the file when I'm doing a comp image because I want to make sure that the tones in the background are matching the tones on the actual original image. So I'll save all of the white balance adjustment and adjusting blacks and whites and contrast till the very end. So I've got my raw file here opened in Photoshop. And if you come over here to the toolbar menu, you can see that you've got this little quick select tool. Now, if you've got Photoshop 2020, what you can do is there's a really cool little feature called Select Subject. If I click on that, Photoshop does a really good job of identifying the baby here is the subject and has done a pretty good job in selecting the subject. And when I say pretty good, I say it's okay. But because when you've got an image where you've got a background that is similar to the subject, Photoshop gets a bit confused here where the pixels tend to merge together. So it does an okay selection, but it misses all these little fuzzy bits here where it merges. So a couple of things. If you're going to be shooting and thinking about images that you're going to comp in new backgrounds, make it a bit easier for yourself and choose a background that's going to be high contrast. So for this image, maybe a dark grey or a grey background is going to be a lot easier for you to select and select that image. A lot of photographers use green screens as well as backgrounds to make it easier, but you've got to make sure that you light the screen. So if you're doing daylight, then maybe popping a darker background is going to make your life a lot easier. But if it's something that you've decided after the fact that you want to change the background for, then there are better methods than using Photoshop's AI to cut it out because it's such a difficult scenario here. So that's the select and mask. It does work when you've got a high contrast background, like say you've got a subject that's against green or white, or that Photoshop does an excellent job. In this instance, and for beginners, if you're starting out and this is going to be your first attempt at swapping out the background, then I don't recommend that you use the select and mask. I think it's really confusing and it doesn't do a good job. I think the best way to cut out an image is to use the pen tool, and it's this little icon here. And basically what you're going to do is just zoom in as far as you can and take 10 minutes to trace around the background. The reason that I love the pen tool is that it is really easy to use. And all you're doing is following the line and clicking. Now there are more advanced techniques that you can change the curvature of each little point, and you'll see tutorials out there that show you how to do this. I think it's just extra, adds more confusion to the process. So basically what I would do is just zoom in as far as you can go and just trace around. Take your time, put some Netflix on, listen to music, and just spend the time going around and doing it this way. As you get better and you start to understand how to select and mask, you can use the select and mask features, but I think when you're just starting out, even though this feels like it's going to take forever, it's a lot easier and a lot faster than doing it using the select and mask tools where you're going to get it wrong. Because you can see Photoshop is going to have a really hard time at discerning which is a background and which is actual rug here in this image. Now I've zoomed in quite a bit. I'm at 1680%. So if I zoom out, you can see just how far I've gone. And so basically what you do is trace around the entire image using the pen tool, and I'll speed up the image, speed up the process here so you don't have to sit here and watch me trace around the image. And if you make a mistake like I have here, I've gone too far into the baby, just hit Edit, Undo, or the shortcut Command Z. So that will undo each step that you've done, and you can keep doing that as many times as you want until you get back on the right path. So this is what I love about using the pen tool to cut out, because if you're using other automated systems, you will continue to find yourself making mistakes, particularly when you're just starting out doing this. So this is almost mistake proof. Like, you can undo what you do, go back, and you won't lose your selection. So just continue on now, and I'll speed it up a bit more. All right, so just finishing off here, going around the outside, and you'll notice that once you get to the final point and you've joined your points up, the entire selection will go blue. So that's now I have a closed selection. Just going to zoom in so you can see how that looks. All right, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Edit. I'm going to go back a few steps. So you can see, here's my last point, and I'm going to make the final selection. It's going to, so the last one attaches to the first one, click, and the entire selection goes blue. All right, and then right click on that and come down to Make Selection. And you just want to have a 1 pixel radius and leave everything as the default. Hit OK, and now you can see the marching ants. So I've got a selection. Okay, now all I need to do is simply hit the little mask icon down here, and Photoshop is going to create a layer mask, and the background has now been cut out. All right, and so that took me about 5 minutes to do. So you can see that without all the messing around, it is actually the fastest way to do it. It just feels really tedious, but I think this is the fastest way. So what I want to do now is just refine the edge of my mask. So if I come in here and double click on the mask, I'm going to get a little dialog box that drops down, and I'm going to hit Select and Mask. Okay, and now I'm in my masking dialog box, and so I just want to show you, you've got the option of seeing different backgrounds. So you can have onion skin, you can have the marching ants that show your selection, you can have an overlay. I like the overlay because you can see what you're doing. Sometimes the overlay color isn't it doesn't have enough contrast to the original subject, so sometimes it might be helpful to just change that color. So if you just double click on that color box, you can change it to whatever color you want, and you can also change the opacity of that background so you can just see more. So it'll make the background darker, or these are the areas that you're cutting out, so you can see what you're doing, and it makes life a lot easier to actually refine those edges. So I'm going to stick to pink for this one and hit OK. This is just so I can see what I'm doing. All right, so what I want to do now is I want to refine these edges so that they don't look so hard and cut out, and just make it all blend in a bit more. So you can see, if I zoom in here, you can see that there's bits of the background blending in with bits of the hair and the hat, And also when you look at the cutout of the skin, you can see that there is gaps and it's not a seamless cutout. So this is where we're going to refine our mask. So what we want to know is, like, you've got some brushes down the side once you're in this dialog box. So the first brush here, this is just a quick selection tool. So if you've got the brush itself, and then you've got these little pluses and minuses here on the side. So if I hit plus and I come in and say I want to add to the mask, it's going to add areas there. All right, so now I've added more of the background, okay? But it's not refining the edges, it's just simply adding areas to the mask. So this is the mask, the baby, and if I add, I'm going to make it bigger. If I subtract, I'm making it smaller. All right, so you can see that I've just added and I don't want to do that, so I'm going to go back to edit, undo. If I hit subtract from the mask, so I want to remove any areas, I can do the same. So if I come across there, that's going to now remove part of the baby. So it's subtracting is going to take away from the mask, adding is going to add to the mask. This is probably the most confusing part about using this particular dialog box to cut out the images, but once you get past this, it gets really easy. So I'm going to go back and undo that. So that is simply to select areas, telling Photoshop that these are the areas you want to add to the mask. The one that I think is the most important for this basic editing is this Refine Edge tool. Again, if I add, I'm going to expand my selection, and so I'm going to be adding background. So if I go around the Refine Edge tool, so I'm just going to come in closer, and I've got add selected. If I come in, it's going to be a hot mess, and this is where most people hate this tool, or when you're starting out as a beginner, because it's really confusing, because I'm telling Photoshop I need to add to the background. I'm making a hot mess of it. So if I just hit edit, undo, get rid of those two. What I want to be doing is subtracting from the mask to refine these edges. So you've also got another little drop down menu which changes the hardness of the brush, and when you want to be using a softer brush when you've got sort of soft edges between the background and your figure. If you've got a very hard edge, so let's say you were selecting a street pole that was sharp against a blue sky, then that's a hard edge against a hard edge, so you use a hard edge brush. But because we've got these soft edges here, you want to have a soft brush. Okay, so, and I've got subtract selected, and I'm going to come around here now and mask around the edges, and Photoshop is now going to refine those edges and just blend them in and make them a bit softer. So I can come around and just do that whole edge. All right, and it's going to, you can just see that it's just blending that in and just refining that, and we're getting all the little hairs here, and I'm going to come down around the baby here, refine those edges, and it's picking up all the little hairs. We're going to do the edge of the rug here just to make it all blend in a bit better. And I might add that this image is pretty difficult because you've got such a shallow depth of field, so the background is starting to go out of focus and blend in with the rug. So it's tricky to get all of these edges looking good, but I think Photoshop is doing a pretty good job. So we're just cutting out and just refining those edges there. Okay, and once we're happy with how that looks, a couple of things we can do now is I can add a little bit more of a feather to the edge, just so that so a couple of pixels, just so it feathers out that cutout and makes it just look a little bit nicer. So I'll just zoom in, I'll go back to no feather, see that? And now I'm feathering. See how it just makes it just a bit softer and look a bit nicer. So you can play around with that. I can also smooth, and I can add contrast, or you can also shift the edge. So I'm going to go back to 0 there, just to make it all look a lot better, or I can make it a little bit smaller by a couple of pixels. So there are a couple of things that you can play with. Just go back there to the selection. All right, so that's looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with how that looks. So I've made a good selection. So you can come down here. You've got a few options when you're making a selection. Right down the bottom here, you've got output to, and I think as a default, make sure that you can have just the selection. You can have layer mask and new layer. My preferred one is new layer with layer mask, and then hit OK. All right, so let's go to our layers, and there it is. So that's our refined edge. And so I'll show you what we had before, and this is where we have after. So it's not a huge difference, but you can see that we've done a really good job at cutting out that image. Now I'm just going to get rid of this under one. You can see the difference now. We've just got rid of a little bit more of the background and softened it out. Another thing you can do is take advantage of the layer mask here and use your brush to just refine the edge without having to muck around in the actual masking dialog box. So if I come in here, what I can do is I can now non-destructively come in and clean up the finer points. So, and that is these areas where there is a little bit of more wall showing. Wherever I paint with black is going to add and remove those areas, okay? So I can come in here and refine the edge. And so this is where if you're doing really difficult cutouts or you're just having trouble cutting out an area, you can easily come in and clean up the edge of the mask using your actual layer mask. So just wherever I'm brushing with black is going to remove those areas, and wherever I brush with white will add to those areas. All right, so you can just see now I can come around and just refine those edges, particularly if you've got something that is really complicated where the edges blur into each other. All right, and I can just come in and get rid of bits of background. Okay, so another thing that you want to do, if you know in advance that you're going to be cutting out an image, then you want to make sure that you have got your image is sharp all the way through, and you're going to have an easier job of cutting it out. So make sure that you've pick a narrower depth of field so that you're not having to have backgrounds that are sort of blurring in together with the image. So I can come around slowly, bit by bit, and refine that edge using a mask. If I make a mistake, I can brush back with white and add it back. So that's non-destructive, okay, just to refine those edges. All right, so you can go around and do that, and that's going to give you a much better looking edge. All right, so once you've done that, now we can start playing around with adding backgrounds and blending the two images together so that they look seamless. So once our background is cut out, we can decide on what the best background is to replace the original image. So what you can do, the simplest background you can put in is a block color. So you can actually do that from the adjustment panel down here. So it's this little icon here. If I click on that, I can go to solid color and bring that up. You'll get a little dialog box, which is the color picker. If you slide it across to the left, it's going to reduce the saturation. Slide it across to the right will increase the saturation. Okay, and then you can adjust the colors up and down the color spectrum here to have whatever color you like, or you might want to go with something that already looks like one of the colors you've got in this shot. Like I might do an orange like on the baby's hat, or I might want to have something like a light blue that matches the baby's mittens or something like that. So there are lots of little options there that you can choose, and of course you can change the saturation so it's not like overly saturated image. Colors are going to be hard on the eye, so I think for this image something a bit lighter works. So I could have something like that, and that looks okay. All right, so we've got a color here in the background, and if I zoom in, you can see that like where the original file is, I can already see the noise and texture of that original file, and my new background is very smooth and artificial looking by comparison. So it's still not looking quite right. So what can we do to make this look like it fits in with the image a bit better? And one of the best things we can do is add a texture overlay to this color fill layer. So the way to do that is to have a texture selected, and you can actually download the gold texture pack in the resources section of the gold community, and we can add one of those. So I go to File, Place Embedded, and it'll a little dialog box will open up, and then you can search through in your on your computer to the spot where you've placed your gold textures, and there are a number that you can choose from, and I'm just going to choose this one, which is like a simple stone kind of stone wall background, and I'm going to place that on top. So there it is, you can see it there in the background. I can just grab onto those handles and increase the size, and because I've placed it underneath my layer mask, it's going to show up in the background. But now I've got a grey background and I've lost my color fill, and I just want the texture of this background combined with the color of the color fill that I've already placed. So I could change my blend mode from normal to overlay or soft light. I think soft light looks best. And now you can see that I've got those textures there combined with the lovely blue background. So that already is starting to look a bit more realistic, and you can also reduce the amount of texture that comes through or increase it. So I think somewhere around there looks pretty good. And now if you want to, you can also change the color fill. You can come back and edit the color just by double clicking on that color, and I can change that to whatever I want and make it another color, and that will come up. So if I wanted to, I could maybe come and have like a light pink background. If I wanted to, hit OK, hit File, Save, and now my color fill will be pink. So you can change that around. So I'm going to undo that and go back to the original blue. So you can still continue to edit that. So let's just say the client comes back and says, oh, I don't like the blue, can you make it pink? You can easily edit that and make sure that you save all your layers as you go along. So now we've got a background that's starting to look good, but the thing that stands out to me is the fact that the background is much sharper than our foreground. So what we want to do is make the background match. So you can see that it's sharp sort of around here, and then by the time we get to the back of that blanket, it starts to drop out of focus. So what we're going to do is combine these two layers. So I'm going to merge those layers now, and I'm now going to, and what I can do is Command J, make a copy of that layer, and I'm going to now blur it a little bit, because I want it to match the background a bit better. So let's have a look. I'm just going to zoom in. So you can see that that is looking a lot better now, a lot more realistic where the focus drops off. Let's see if we go a little bit further, how that looks. That's probably too much. I think that somewhere around there looks good, and it's just a matter of testing it out, seeing what you like. So I think somewhere around there looks pretty good. Commit to that. So there is the blur, and there's our original, so I can always go back and adjust that if I need to. All right, so we've now got an image here with a nice flat background with a bit of a texture, which looks great, but we can go one better than that. And what I like to do is use actual textured backgrounds like wallpapers with a texture in them, or textured timbers, lots of nice warm tones, bricks, things like that that give a bit more depth to the image and match in with the original image that you're working with. So you can collect these images, so whenever you see a great looking textured wall, a great looking background, take a shot and store those images in your archive. They come in so handy. So with this image here, we've got the block background, but I think it looks really flat. So my preferred kind of image is something, say, like this damask wallpaper, or maybe even a textured timbers like this. I think look great. Now these you can there are websites that you can download free versions for these backgrounds that you can use. So I'll put a link into the blog post for this tutorial so that you can find that website and download. There's lots of them available. Just double check that you are allowed to use the image royalty free for the purposes that you're using it for. So I've got this image and I kind of like the color, but it doesn't quite fit in with the tones of the existing image. So what I'm going to do is add an adjustment layer. I'm going to add a photo filter adjustment layer. So there it is there in the adjustment layer palette. And what I can do is, you've got a whole different set of filters that you can add, and it just adds, you can increase the blues, you can add red, or you can add an orange to the tone, or what I'm going to do is add a warming filter. I think it's this one here, and I'm just going to increase the temperature. So where this adjustment layer is placed is just over the wallpaper, so it's not influencing the baby at all, it's just influencing the background. So I'm going to kind of get a tone that matches in more with the rug and the background, so something around there, so more a goldy tone looks good. All right, so once I'm happy with that background, I want to convert that background so that it matches the blur of the original image. So you can see that that's too sharp at the moment. So what I want to do is duplicate my background image. I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and let's have a look. We'll just come in tighter so we can see before and after. I think something around there. I'll just zoom back out again. Let's see how that looks before, after. We'll just come up a little bit more. And that kind of, what that does is making the background look blurred actually makes the foreground look sharper, because we're not comparing super sharp with slightly soft. So that sorts that out, and that's now all sitting in and looking a lot better, but we can take that even further. So what I'm going to do now is come up to my top layer, and I'm going to combine all the layers together. So Command Option Shift E. All right, and now what I'm going to do is create a new curves. First what I'm going to do is duplicate that, and I'm going to give the face a little sharpen. So I'm going to come down to Filter, Other, High Pass. All right, just want to sharpen those little details, like the edge of the hat and the eye. So around usually 6 pixels is enough. Hit OK. Change my blend mode to hard light for this one. Hit OK. I'm going to create a layer mask for that. I'm going to invert the layer mask. so that I've now hidden the areas that I've sharpened. And now I can come in with a white brush and just brush over the eyes just to bring in a little bit of sharpness there. So you can see that makes a huge difference. So just do the eyes and the eyebrow, and maybe just sharpening a little bit around the cap there, just to bring out a little bit of texture. All right, and I'll do the mittens as well. That looks pretty cool. That looks good, like that. All right, and now I just want to just do a little bit of burning and dodging to that image. So what I'm going to do is hit a curves adjustment layer. Just drop that down a little bit, about like that. Change my blend mode to luminosity. Okay, and that's not going to influence your colors as much. So there's before and after. And now on that layer mask, wherever I paint with black as my foreground color is going to reveal what's underneath. So what I'm trying to do really is kind of make an organic looking vignette with this image. So wherever I brush with white is going to bring out the baby back to the original skin tone. Okay, and we'll just sort of do the top half. And maybe a bit of his legs as well. And you can see that that little action sort of just holds it all together a lot better. I think that's starting to look good. And if you want to come back and bring back any areas of darkness, I can just paint over those areas with the black and just maybe merge the little areas over here and the front, and so that's now drawing our eye into the final image, and I think that looks pretty good there. So that's a couple of ways to change the background. It did take a long time with me doing it because I was talking at the same time, but this is using that pen tool is a far superior way to cut out images. If you're a beginner or even a bit more advanced, I just think you have so much more control than relying on Photoshop's AI, which is going to get confused when you've got a background that is blurred out. So give that a shot and have a try of some different backgrounds, and I think that's really elevated this image to something that looks like high art just by swapping out the background. So my final little trick just to merge and blend everything together and make it all look believable is to put a filter over the lot. So what I'm going to do is I've selected my merged image here, and I'm going to come down to my adjustment layers, and I'm going to come here to color lookup. All right, and what I'm going to do is select one of these little filters here, and I think I'm going to go with edgy amber. Now when I apply it, you're going to go, ooh, that's awful, what are you doing? But have a look what happens when we just reduce it to even like 5%, 5 or 10%, something like that. So you can see how it applies those color filters throughout the entire image, and now it looks like the whole image feels a lot more like believable. So you can have a little play with that, increase it a little bit more, something about there. And I think that as a final image works really well. So you can have a play around, change the colors, do what you like, try different backgrounds, but I think that works really well. And so you've got something that went from this to this.